everybody. Welcome back to our second airing of Genealogy Garage Online. It's October 17th, 2020, and I'm glad that you can join us today. We're going to have a special presentation. And just a reminder, Genealogy Garage is co-sponsored by the Southern California Genealogical Society and the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America, Southern California. And next month, Isabel Perez of GSHA is going to show us a neat way to present our genealogy findings to family members using Google Drive and Bitmojis, which are those cute cartoon characters you may have seen in some social media platforms. I'll have more about that in the coming days, and I'll email you if you're on my emailing list. And if you'd like to be on that list, you should see my email up there on the screen. Just go ahead and shoot me an email and I'll add you. And then you can keep abreast as to what we're doing at LAPL for genealogy. So today, one of the beautiful things about Los Angeles Public Library is we have many different subject departments, and we all kind of work separately, but we then come together to help each other. So today, I'm thrilled to have two librarians from our Digitization and Special Collections department. You may remember Special Collections. We had a tour of the rare books room at LAPL last year, or maybe earlier in the year. It's all blur. But that rare books room is managed by our Special Collections librarians. And today we have two of them, Suzanne M. and Rose Knopka, and they're going to show us how to think like an archivist as relates to our genealogy findings, the best way to preserve and that sort of thing. So take it away, Rose and Suzanne.
Thanks. Thank you, Julie. So I'm Suzanne M. I'm the acting senior librarian of Digitization and Special Collections, and I'm really excited to present this to as part of Genealogy Garage because there is a lot of crossover in terms of the materials that we work with and what genealogists work with. And so this program is part of what's called our Memory Lab program. In 2018, we were one of 7 libraries across the country that was awarded a grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services to start a memory lab. And the Memory Lab is a program based on the DC Public Library's model, which includes a DIY digitization station for patrons, workshops like this, as well as online resources that can help people along on their personal archiving journeys. Much of the material that we're presenting in this workshop is adapted from Jamie Mears, who is an archivist at the Library of Congress, and she's kindly made a lot of this content available for reuse. So today's workshop is going to be an introduction on how to care for your analog, physical keepsakes, so paper-based items, film, that sort of thing. So what do you have that represents your family archives that you plan to preserve? A lot of people have some of these types of materials, including books, scrapbooks, diaries, pamphlets, documents such as letters, deeds or marriage certificates, newspapers and newspaper clippings, photographs, including prints, slides, negatives, and film, as well as audio and video in the form of film, discs, cassettes, reel-to-reel, etc. If you have any items that you were hoping to preserve that's not listed here, please type them in the chat. I'm really interested to know what types of materials people are working with, and maybe we can help answer some questions about those. And so where do you keep the stuff that's important to you? I tend to ask this when we present this workshop in person, but some examples of places people typically keep their family treasures include frames on their walls. However, framed photos may get prolonged exposure to sun, which causes fading. So it's actually not a great place to keep your treasured family photos. Some people keep their materials in albums. However, conventional albums sometimes have a sticky backing, which causes yellowing of the photo, or they use plastic enclosures that off-gas and actually cause color change in the photos and deterioration as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you can display things in frames or in albums in a way that will help you preserve these for the long term. People also store their family treasures in boxes, cardboard boxes. Unfortunately, cardboard is acidic. It's made with wood pulp, which is also known as lignin. And over time, the wood pulp actually stretches and causes breakage, and also causes yellowing. And these newspapers as well. Newspapers are made with a lot of wood pulp. So having things in cardboard boxes or having materials next to newspapers, not very good. We also store some of our stuff in attics. Attics can get really hot, might have animals and other running around, and its heat is very detrimental to items that you would like to preserve. So attics are not a good place to store. Basements are prone to flooding. So basements, another place you do not want to keep your precious family items. Some of us store items in closets, and actually off the ground in a closet is probably the best place in your house. Closets are usually in the center of your home where it's coolest and away from sunlight. So closets are actually a really good place. Some of us keep things under the bed. Under the bed, there is a risk of exposure to flooding, as well as exposure to dust and dirt, which is not good for keeping materials long-term. So under the bed, not ideal either. So what do we do with all of this stuff? Initial reactions that a lot of people have is to become overwhelmed, paralyzed at taking on this project. They may ignore the stuff. People may add more stuff to the pile in no apparent order. And if there's anything that you take away from this workshop, is one, to adopt an archivist perspective, and two, that should be a number two, be at peace with the decisions and progress you make, even if they fall short of the idea. Professionally, much of archivists' time is spent doing exactly what genealogists or personal archivists are doing. We sort through a lot of stuff. We try to impose order where there's chaos, and it's often just as daunting as what you would face. And sometimes we have to make decisions that don't necessarily meet our ideal as well, depending on time and resources that we have. So we want you to understand that that's okay. So there's this misconception that a lot of people have that archivists like to keep everything. And this is actually not true. One of the key jobs of an archivist is to make the determination of what has permanent value and merits saving, and what can be excluded from a collection. This is called, in archivist speak, appraisal. We're trying to figure out whether an item should stay in a collection or should it go back to the donor or in the recycling bin. And some of the basic tips that we have as far as like when you are doing your own appraisal is one, to follow the rule of three. This rule is taken from the IT community with regard to physical items, especially paper-based items. If you have paper documents, multiple copies of paper documents, you can save 2 or 3 of the most precious ones. And if you have digital items, you'll want to save 3 copies of your final draft in 2 different places, with one of them offsite. And that will ensure that you will have long-term access to those items. Another thing you want to ask yourself while you're doing your appraisal is whether this item is available elsewhere. A lot of people come to us with newspapers of historic events, and they think that it's something that they want to preserve, but actually libraries like the Central Library at LAPL has really long runs of some of these newspapers, and so it's really not necessary to preserve that physical newspaper if it's already being taken care of somewhere else. Another thing that you want to think about is whether the item in question tells your story, whether it tells your family's story. If it doesn't, you probably don't need to keep it in your collection. So yeah, just following these 3 basic sort of tips will help you in figuring out what to keep. And you'll want to sort stuff into quote unquote clumps. And this is a very technical term that one of the archivists at the Library of Congress used when they were showing us how to present this material. So archivists call these clumps series. So basically you want to just put things in piles, like in here, this is an archivist desk, and they are in the process of putting items into different categories, such as correspondence, honors and tributes, etc. And you'll want to, like in this photo, note the contents of your clumps and their locations. So what's the most important thing you can do for your photographs and media? The most important thing you can do is to identify or label your important items. This is one of the first things that archivists do as well, because when you don't have identification, you end up with really intriguing photos that have no context. I've had people in my workshop ask me for help identifying relative, like in their old photos, because they're, a couple generations before, these photos were never labeled, so they don't know who these people are or how they're related to them. So what you want to do is label these photos. And so these photos are actually on the left. They're photos of the Hom children in Highland Park around 1966 from our Shades of LA photo collection. And on our right, we have Figueroa Street in Highland Park up in 1925. So without this information, we will have no idea. Very, very tough time identifying what or who are in these photos. And when you're labeling, you want to do, so when labeling, archivists use materials whose actions on an item are reversible. So when you label, you'll want to use notes written in pencil, which can be erased. You'll want to avoid writing in pens or with pens or Sharpies. If you're using an eraser, make sure you use a plastic or vinyl eraser, like Prismacolor's Magic Rub, which does not leave any residue after you use it. The pink pearl erasers that are really common at office supply stores, stay away from those. They will leave traces of pink dye on your paper, and you've probably, a lot of you have experienced this before. And additionally, Post-it notes, rubber bands, paper clips, and staples are also no-nos. Post-its will leave a sticky residue behind that will break down materials over time. It can become permanently stuck and difficult to remove, or conversely, it could just fall off. So your labeling was all for naught because that label may have fallen to some other part of your box or folder, and now you don't know exactly which photo it applies to. Paper clips, as well as staples, they will rust over time. The iron oxide spreads to the paper and causes it to deteriorate much more quickly than if you don't have staples or paper clips. So often we'll, in our department, receive materials that have staples and paper clips, and one of the first things we do is to remove those. And rubber bands as well. Over the course of decades, rubber bands will melt onto whatever it is bound with. So that will also damage the paper that you're trying to keep together. So instead, we encourage you to use either strips of pH neutral paper folded up to keep items together. Folders, acid-free folders are great as well, or envelopes. If you must use paper clips, like if you really, really want to, you can use plastic paper clips that are pH neutral. And there's a brand actually that's offered through archival supply companies called Plastic Clips with a K that you can order. All right, so when you're describing your personal archives, you need to know your audience. You want to think about who are you writing this description for? For a lot of you, it's going to be for your family, for your relatives. So what information will they find important? Names, relations, what do they need to know to understand your collection? And if you're planning to ultimately donate your personal archive to a repository like the LA Public Library or another institution, you'll want to ideally provide more information because outside of your family, we don't know as much about your family history. And you'll want to highlight these important types of fields, so including names, such as who took certain photos, names of family members, people who was corresponding in certain letters. Also, dates are very important. And you can either put down specific dates if you know them, a date span, or a decade if you're not absolutely sure. Locations, where was a certain photo taken, or where was an item created? Any events that are represented in the item. and subjects that are depicted in photos. Any descriptive details for context. And context is key. Knowing how a collection came together over time and into its current state is really important to understanding the history of a person, a family, or an organization. Archivists typically, the type of information they want to know, it includes how do all of these materials relate? Why are they important? What is their provenance? Like who collected these materials? And so when you're putting your materials into clumps, the arrangement that you made will drive your description. So whatever clumps you arrange, describe those clumps. If you put things in boxes, describe the contents of each box. If in folders, give titles to the folders. Ultimately, you want to avoid item level description, at least until you've gotten a handle over your whole collection. So describing things item by item will take way too much time and can lead to frustration and unfinished projects. You'll also want to make a list. In your list, you'll write down the clump contents and the locations. This acts as a master list or an inventory so that you know where to find specific materials after you file them away. Be an archivist, not a historian. Take a step back and be objective and let someone else tell the story for the moment, at least. So when it comes to personal archives, the creator sometimes has a hard time getting too involved with the collection and wanting to write really long explanations of all that's in it. Unfortunately, these types of projects sometimes never get finished, and a lot of information about the collection, especially its context, is lost. So if you approach it from like a more high level, by clumps, by folders, you'll be more likely to finish your project. And then once you have that down, get more detailed and think about writing that memoir. So how do you save your stuff? Basically, preservation can be broken down into 3 simple phrases. Keep it cool, keep it dry, and keep it clean. For the layperson, as far as temperature, 72 degrees Fahrenheit or lower is good. Temperature that's comfortable for a human. And relative humidity at 45 to 55% is okay. Optionally, if you decide to retire to the Florida Keys, where it's really humid, you'll want to buy a data logger or a hygrometer. In Southern California, you don't have to worry about humidity too much, but you can purchase a hygrometer like this for as low as $10 on Amazon to monitor the humidity in your storage space. As far as storage goes, here I have a photo of some examples that are used in archives of document boxes and folders and enclosures. They can be ordered from Hollinger, Gaylord, and other vendors that are listed in the handout that's linked below the video on the description. These items can be kind of expensive. So sometimes people wonder, do I need to buy supplies from an archival company? And the answer is no, you don't. So there are plenty of products that you can buy that are designed to store our stuff. And the code words that you want to look for when you're buying storage materials is acid-free or pH neutral. Some items or some products are additionally labeled as lignin-free, which is even better. And not all preservation supplies are created equal. For your most precious items, if you can swing it when possible, use archival quality housing, such as that shown on the left, including acid-free folders, document boxes, handling your precious photos with gloves, or at the very least, clean hands. And safe plastics that you could use for holding materials include mylar or polyethylene or polypropylene. These, if they are too expensive for your purposes, you can use other plastic enclosures. And the rule of thumb when it comes to plastic is, if you're gonna seek out alternatives, is if it smells, don't use it. If it smells, that means that plastic is already off-gassing. And on the right, I have a photo with an example of some plastics that are not recommended. These plastics would be the type that smell. And what they do is, like you see here, is the item that was kept in that enclosure kind of rubbed off onto the plastic. And then additionally, sometimes those plastics will stick onto your photos or your documents. And when you try to take those out of the enclosure, they may cause tearing, like in that photo. So I'm going to hand it off to Rose to talk about photo albums and other types of materials.
Hey there. So my name is Rose Knopka. I'm a librarian archivist in digitization and special collections. And thanks for starting us off, Suzanne. I'm just going to continue on talking about safely storing papers and photographs, and briefly about film and video, as well as planning for the future care of your archival materials. So starting off with photo albums. So here's a great example of a good photo album. So the album is made with acid-free pages, and the photos can be added using photo corners, which allows photos to be added or removed with little risk of damage. And these photos are also really nicely labeled. So here's a couple of examples of the bad. So these photo albums are not acid-free. The black paper backing on the left-hand album is made of high-acidity wood pulp paper, which causes yellowing to the photos eventually. And the album on the right is common in a lot of households, but it's not acid-free either. And it appears that the labels were glued onto the photos, which can cause items to stick to the album and cause damage when removing the photographs. The labels will lose adhesiveness and also cause yellowing and staining. So this is the ugly. So these types of albums and scrapbooks were very popular in the late 19th to early 20th century. And there are many examples of these in Central Library's special collections. They're made with wood pulp paper, and you can see how yellow the backing is. Newspaper is very acidic, and it should be photocopied or digitized. And then eventually you'll need to throw away the original because the acid will spread to nearby materials. Remember to consider whether the newspaper clipping tells your story or not. So it can help you decide if it's something that you want to keep. So with these albums, what's gone wrong? What's so bad? So the photos are pasted onto documents that obscure text on the left. Documents are stapled onto pages, and the staples rust over time and break down paper. Wood pulp paper and probably moisture stain the letter on the right, and that moisture might eventually breed mildew and mold. A couple more examples of things to avoid. On the left, that paper got folded, so eventually it's probably going to break and tear over time. And you can see on the right there, the wood pulp paper, it's starting to flake and break apart. So here we have a few examples of acid burn marks. You can see the browning and the discoloration there. So how to avoid the burn? With albums like these, interleave pages with buffered paper, which you can also find in archival supply stores. It's treated with a basic solution that offsets the acidity. So you will want to digitize these albums before the paper becomes too brittle to ensure that you can access them in the future. And we wanted to recommend Colo albums. These are pretty widely available. You can find them at colo.com, Pottery Barn, Amazon, a store called Top Drawer, and Freestyle Photo in Hollywood. So these albums are really great. They feature acid-free and lignin-free paper and large scrapbook-style pages. And the albums are covered in book cloth, and you can add pages to the album. Colo also sells archival photo tape and photo corners. So oversized items can be stored in a flat box, which is best. Alternatively, you can roll up items if it's absolutely necessary. So if you have limited space. So with your albums, be sure to use photo corners to attach photographs to the page. You'll see Lineco brand archival material at a lot of arts and crafts stores. And so be sure to avoid glue on the right and that double-sided tape. So damage can and will happen. So we just try to do our best to protect materials and slow deterioration, and be sure to make repairs that are reversible. So when doing repairs, there's a document repair tape that you can use, and be sure to choose one that's acid-free and pH neutral. So whatever you do, do not use Scotch tape. So that will damage your materials, and your documents will eventually turn yellow from the adhesive. Another thing to avoid is direct sunlight. So strong light will fade or cause color changes in your paper, art, and photographs over time. In our department, we use adjustable shades. For displaying your photos, it's really useful to use a matted photo frame. The acid content in cardboard backings of traditional frames will yellow your photos. A matted frame made with some percentage of cotton will preserve your photos. Matted frames are layered so that the photo does not touch the glass, which prevents the photo from sticking. So better yet, think about displaying copies instead of your originals. So the next section just touches briefly on film and video. And here are a few examples of common types. The 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter, and Super 8. So film has a really limited lifespan, which kind of varies widely, as you can see. So, for some formats, there's no time left. Some, you have quite a bit of time for items that might be in your collection. Just a few tips on storing film, if you happen to have it. So be sure to let film breathe. Don't store it in plastic bags. Some more recommendations for film storage. You can store it flat on polypropylene cores with a flat wind in polypropylene containers. So ideally, you can store it at less than 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's kind of, a recommendation probably for a film archive. And then kind of lowest relative humidity, 30 to 40%. So you can tape down the ends of the film with acid-free paper tape and add a head and tail leader if there isn't one already. So like paper, film can become moldy, which is surprising, but here's an example. So be sure to separate and isolate any bad film that you have so it doesn't spread to your other materials. Some other kinds of deterioration that film has is sticky shed syndrome, which is caused by humidity on the magnetic tape binder. And it causes a deterioration that leaves a gummy residue on the tape heads. And this can damage the master tape. Vinegar syndrome is another form of decay. It will smell really strongly of vinegar. That's the symptom. The causes are inherent in the chemical nature of the plastic, and its progress really depends on how it's stored. So cool and dry is best. So think about depositing cellulose nitrate film with a certified facility, as it can catch fire. It can be ID'd by the edge code, which will include date of manufacture, and it'll be labeled nitrate. So here in LA, we're really lucky to have UCLA Film and Television Archive and the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and they can help to identify this material, and they may accept a donation. So just to touch on magnetic media, the storage for this is similar to the materials we talked about before. So kind of like what's comfortable for a human. 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit and about 50% relative humidity. So the tape should be rewound. Mid-wound tapes will have extra pressure. And for cassettes, you can discard the record tab. And be sure to store vertically and away from strong magnetic fields, which kind of covers appliances in general and computers. So the lifespan on these is about 10 years left. So be sure to reformat your media to digital while you still have time. And keep an eye on the humidity and store separately from paper-based materials. So just to kind of review a little bit, here are some simple storage guidelines to follow. So keep your treasures out of the attic, as it can get hot and you might have some critters. And also avoid the basement. It's prone to flooding, and also just the moisture would be damaging. And where you should store your materials. So try to look for a closet above ground. If you can swing it, you could buy a fireproof safe, just to be on the very safe side. But plastic containers like those shown in the slide are really affordable, and they can help protect from moisture. Closets are usually located in the middle of your home, so those are going to be the coolest locations, and they can be kind of really the best spot. Just kind of be aware if it's located near the kitchen or the bathroom, which can be a source of moisture. And your ideal shelving would be made with power-coated steel that won't rust and placed about 6 inches above the floor. So also be sure to try to protect your valuable things from pests. Like always work with clean hands. Make sure your work and storage spaces are clean, and you don't kind of have food and drink around your archival materials. And remember that wood, rubber bands, Post-it notes, staples, paper clips, and tape are the enemies. They will cause permanent damage to your materials over time. So you saved your archive. It's really good to think about plans for the future. If you want to make arrangements for your treasures to be passed down to the next generation, or consider donating them to an archival institution to ensure that they have long-term care. So family archives really matter. They tell the stories of who we are, and they tell the stories of our communities, and future generations can have a record of where we came from. And often they become national treasures. So it's kind of good timing. Today is the Archives Bazaar, and it's sponsored by LA as Subject. And this is a really great tool. It's a searchable directory for patrons who would like to donate their personal collections to an institution in the greater Los Angeles region. And I have a link there. So once you're on the site, you can search local archives by institution type and the time period that they're collecting in, and also the type of holdings. And it includes like really, really detailed descriptions of the repository and contact information. And all day today from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., the Archives Bazaar is being held. It's a once-a-year event, and it's usually held at USC, but this year it's moved online, and it will feature videos and programs. So we have an item in an exhibit, and also there's a program at 1 o'clock today. It's called More Than an Architectural Icon, The Collections of Central Library. And it will feature a panel of 11 librarians, including Suzanne. So I hope you can check that out. And then just to sum up, so it's okay to not keep everything. Duplicates are okay in moderation. And remember your rule of 3. Ask yourself, are these materials available elsewhere, or are they unique? And what is necessary to help tell my story? And these are in the handout as well. These are a few resources that we recommend. I think the Library of Congress materials on personal archiving are really especially useful. And so we wanted to also highlight kind of one of the offerings from our department, the DIY Memory Lab. So this is located in Octavia Lab, and it's closed for now while the library is closed. But once we reopen, you can think about making an appointment. There's kind of 2 digitization stations, one for photos and documents, and then the other for media. So there's quite a lot of different media that can be digitized. The setup is kind of based on the DIY model, but you do have staff support. in the lab, and they're really detailed written instructions. So I wanted to say thanks very much for attending. This is our contact information, including our Instagram account, in case you want to follow along with what we have going on, and the link for our memory lab as well. And now we just would like to open it up to questions.
Great, great. Oh, wonderful presentation, you two. I'm running immediately to my bookshelf. I see about 10 photo albums that are giving me a hairy eyeball. But we have a lot of questions here, so let me start asking on behalf of the attendees. And also, I neglected to mention, there are handouts related to this program that you'll see the links on both the Facebook and the YouTube description of the event, so you can get a handout that kind of recaps some of the things we learned about today. Okay, so here are some questions and comments. Carlin was responding, I think, Suzanne, to you when you asked what types of materials do people want to preserve, and she just commented that she needs to preserve interview notes. So that's kind of an unusual thing that is specific to genealogy research. We do a lot of interviews, so that's one of the items she needs to preserve. And also, she wanted to remind or reiterate to make sure to identify the photographer of the photo that you have and who provided that photo to you. So just as much information as you can. Yoli says that if she wants to frame a photo, she makes a copy of the photo to frame, and then she can preserve the original, which was something you mentioned, Rose, which was a really good suggestion. Lori wanted to know if you have recommendations for storing textiles, like needlepoint, lace, weavings.
So the handouts will have links to vendors where you can buy acid-free archival boxes that you can use that are specifically made for textiles. And when you store the textiles, you'll also want to keep them at a temperature around 72 degrees or less. You don't want there to be a lot of humidity, and make as few folds as possible. And for textiles that are a lot older, or any textile that you want to keep for the long term, you'll want to handle them with both hands. You never want to pick it up with just one hand. That can cause tearing. And sometimes you'll even want to have part of the textile supported by something that, a table, while you're picking up the other half of the textile.
Great. H. Islas writes, I keep my photos and original documents in my steel safe. Is that a safe place? Is there a chance the items might degrade over time?
Steel safes have a finish that doesn't rust, so that's actually a pretty safe place to keep your documents.
Mary wanted to ask if sticky notes are horrible on everything. Like, would they be okay to use on paper?
In the long term, they are horrible on paper. If you really, really want to use the Post-it note, use it just as a temporary label with the intent of replacing it with another label, because on paper, Post-it notes will either become really sticky to the point where when you want to pull it off, it might tear the paper, the original paper, or it might fall off, and you won't, you won't be able to identify what it is that you had originally labeled.
And our friend Adrian writes that he and his brother inherited 2 clocks, and they're wooden clocks, dated from approximately 1885 to 1910. And they want to display them but are wondering if it's better to leave them in the open or enclose them in some sort of case or covering.
Enclosures are always a good idea. I mean, if you can manage it, an enclosure will protect it from dust and dirt. But if you can't find an enclosure, just make sure you keep it clean while you have it on display. Another approach you could take is to only display it for a certain amount of months and then put it back in storage. That's what that's what we try to do with our materials. We don't want to put things on display, original items on display all the time because of the lighting and exposure to the elements will cause it to degrade. But wood, I mean, especially wood from that time, it's pretty durable. So I think it'll be safe.
Okay. Chris is asking, he or she says, I would like to reproduce a photo printed on a textured brochure from the 1960s. It had been glued into an album, and I want to remove the glue over the image. I moistened it and tried scraping a corner gently with a credit card and damaged it.
Oh, so that's a good question. We're not trained as conservators. We don't have an in-house conservator at the LA Public Library. So I would recommend on the handout, there is a link to the American Institute of Conservators directory. And from there, you can search and find someone locally who specializes in paper-based materials, and they'll be able to help you remove that safely. But yeah, for our own materials, when it needs conservation, we will send it out to an outside conservator.
And Emmanuel was excited about your mention of the memory lab. And this is for me, sort of. Can you just kind of describe again what the memory lab is, and if you'll be offering tours of it once we're open again, or what is it exactly? Can you just explain?
Sure. So the DIY memory lab is it's basically, we have two stations. One is very much focused on different types of film and video, and the other station is focused on digitizing audio and different paper-based items and negatives and photographic film. So these are stations that the public can use. They just require you to attend an orientation before you can use the stations. And if you wanted to tour and look at the stations themselves, you can just go down to the LA Central Library, to the Octavia Lab. It's on level 2, and the Octavia Lab staff will give you a tour of the entire space, including the DIY memory lab.
Wonderful. And we can't wait for that to reopen. And the people who staff that lab are just really great and knowledgeable and friendly. So give it a shot next time you're downtown. Kathy says, I have a book of poems from 1880, which belonged to my second great grandmother. May I continue to keep it on my bookshelf, or should I put it in a storage box, etc.?
If your bookshelf is made of wood, you will want to keep it in an archival storage box, because the proximity to wood will cause yellowing and eventual disintegration of the book.
Jacqueline has a great question that I myself was kind of thinking about as I was watching your presentation. She says, isn't there a danger in digitizing something that access will not be available when the format changes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something we actually cover in our in another workshop that we offer on digital preservation. So basically, when you have digital materials, you'll want to make sure it's in a format that's widely adopted and, if possible, open source. And you'll also want to keep abreast of what formats are coming out that that might be replacing older formats and migrate to those new formats. So it's digital preservation is an ongoing process for, you're basically doing it. It's maintenance for as long as you want to keep that item.
Great. Gina Meg is saying her kids really love to go through their photo albums, and so she really has a good use for the ones with plastic covers. She wants to know, is there a way she can store pictures in an album with the plastic covers that's safe?
Maybe if there's copies.
Yeah, if there are copies. Yeah, especially if you like, a lot of people now take photos, take digital photos, and then they print out those photos to put into albums. That's fine because your original is in the digital format.
Right. And what do you recommend to remove sticky tape residue from the backs of old photos?
When do you recommend?
We do have a comment from another person who's saying that he's been using unwaxed dental floss to glide behind the photo, and that's really worked for him.
Oh. I didn't know that.
Yes, I've used unwaxed dental floss too to slice frozen cheese into perfect medallions.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, if the tape is still fresh, you might be able to pull it off without damaging the item that it's adhered to. But if it's yellowed and old and it's really sticking on there, again, I would recommend consulting with a conservator.
Sam is asking what type of insects eat away at the edges of paper documents, silverfish or others?
Yeah, silverfish. And basically, if you follow the guidelines that we laid out in this presentation, you'll be able to avoid those silverfish.
How do you get a crease out of a paper drawing? Do you know?
That's so that's one of the things that we kind of mentioned, right? We don't want you to fold any of your paper or your photos because that will cause leakage over time. And yeah, once the crease is there, I'm not sure that you can undo it. But again, you can consult with the conservator and see if there's something they can do to offset that fold somehow.
Mary says she's purchased photo albums with plastic covers that are advertised as acid-free, photo safe. Is that not true?
Oh, if the product is advertised as acid-free, then it is, yeah, because that is a regulated standard. If you buy something that says archival, archival is kind of the term archival is kind of like the term all natural. That's not regulated. So you don't want to buy something just because it says archival.
And finally, relating again to the memory lab, can you copy 16 millimeter film at the stations in the memory lab? Do you know?
Not at this time. We have the capability to do 8mm film and Super 8, but not 16mm. If you or someone you know has a 16mm projector that they would like to donate to the library, we may be able to set it up for digitization. But that's maybe. I can't say for sure.
And someone wanted to see that slide again of the memory lab. Can you cast that, Rose, or?
Sure.
Okay.
So. Yeah, and I think there are a few other formats. Or no, maybe this does include everything.
Yeah, and they'll probably just be developing as time goes on, just like Suzanne says, with possibly 16mm or other formats.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I know we've hit our hour, and lots and lots of great questions. This is really an interesting subject that a lot of people are interested in. A reminder, you can rewatch this if you would like. If you just go to the event, the same URL that you used to see this on Facebook or YouTube, just click on that same link. And we're working on getting things closed captioned, so it may be down for a little while, but it also may be up for a little while until we do that. So if you want to rewatch this, just click on the same link after this is all said and done, and you should be able to rewatch it. You can also email us if you have other questions. And I just want to thank you two. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your department or this subject?
So whenever the library reopens back up again, I hope that some of you will come visit us at the Rare Books room. We do take appointments from the public. All you need is a photo ID, a government-issued photo ID, and to fill out a reader registration form to look at the rare materials at the Los Angeles Public Library.
All right. Well, thank you too. This has been a really great time. I appreciate your time, as I know everybody else does. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.